Hello and welcome to this edition of AppSec Discussions with Conducto. My name is Ben Strzokowski. I'm a security consultant with Conducto in North America. And with me, I have my guest, Alec. Alec, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, yeah. I'm Alexander Krasnov. I'm principal security engineer at Meta currently, and previously Dropbox, and previously Palo Alto Networks.
All right. All right. So today, we wanted to take some time to discuss the supply chain and discuss whether it's an overused or if it's a conquered vulnerability that's already taken care of in light of DevSecOps. So to start out with, I'd like to hear your opinion to get started.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think it's not conquered vulnerability yet, and um, just the whole um, topic of supply chain issues is constantly evolving. So I don't think we can ever say it's conquered, even though there have been multiple attempts to say that we have battle against and we have foolproof methods, but in security, there's never a foolproof method.
Right, right. So do you see focusing on the supply chain within DevSecOps? So you see that as an expanding field as we're kind of working toward that?
Yeah, absolutely. DevSecOps has gone through a lot of evolution, so to speak. We have started with quite a bit of emphasis on the traditional SRE and added security on top of it, and that's how kind of like the DevSecOps field kind of started. Um, so traditionally, lots of DevSecOps engineers have been infrastructure focused. And over time, I think roughly around 2020 is when DevSecOps trends have kind of shifted towards more of a application focused, application security focused. And now with in the market, whenever you're looking for the DevSecOps engineers, you're kind of looking for this individuals who are very proficient in infrastructure security, application security, usually network security, cloud security, obviously goes without saying. Um, so it's constantly evolving, and I think supply chain issues come on board with this. I wouldn't necessarily call it a part of AppSec, so I would call it a part of DevSecOps.
Right. So do you think that modern tools are helping to take away a lot of the stigma that previously we had with supply chain issues? Things allowing you to alert whenever a new finding is found, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I would say what I see currently is that we have a lot of tools, and sometimes we have way too many tools in place. So, and with that, you have sometimes too much alert overload or even like just data overload. And what I mean by data in this specific case is that um, we know about a lot of issues all throughout SDLC, and we don't have enough context, even though we have all the information, we don't have enough context on what we need to prioritize. So that's where security orchestration kind of comes into place, and figuring out how you can orchestrate not only your SDLC in a traditional verbiage of orchestration, but more of a how do you orchestrate security of this SDLC now? And that's where Conductor comes in play, where you can definitely orchestrate all of your security tools in place and where you can figure out how to prioritize findings correctly, how to get the most up-to-date and clear picture of just overall your organization.
I think that's an important point that you made there was, the tools are only as good as, who is looking at them and in what context. So you could have output from, multiple different vulnerability scanners that say, for instance, you have Log4j, that's an old version, which is vulnerable there, but you're going to have thousands of instances of that. So how do you prioritize that? Well, and the first step is getting all of those into one place so that you can make decisions about which are more important than others.
Exactly,
Um,
yeah.
and so I think with modern teams being very distributed, having their own workflows coming from multiple different organizations over time, everybody kind of has their own way of doing code, right? And I think that
Yep.
is a bit of a stickier issue, as we're pulling in more and more different types of open source, uh, requirements and dependencies and things like that. we're starting to open up the supply chain. You know, more supply is coming into the chain, so that we
Right.
also have to deal with that sort of volume as well.
Yeah,
So
precisely. Yeah.
do you think it's advantageous for a team who is looking to you know, really implement a secure supply chain um, policy in their organization? Do you think it's important to, you know, to talk about how to prioritize that? So, for instance, like taking a look at the business itself and what they attach as risk um, elements to different types of assets, whether that be an application security project or whether that be an infrastructure, you know, instance. So, do you see that as an important aspect of a working application security program? Is that prioritization and making sure that there are secure business reasons behind each of those decisions being made? And how do you think that that extends specifically to the supply chain?
Yeah, good question. So it definitely stands true that you need to understand the context of what exactly is vulnerable, right? Because let's say we have from our SCA, we have a bunch of um, critical vulnerabilities that are being reported, and then we have our SAST is reporting a bunch of criticals. Maybe there are a bunch of Linux packages and RVMs that being reported as critical, and potentially our desk tool or some others finding some sort of critical issues. Um, like, how do you prioritize this? Yes, that's important area of contextualizing the risk within your organization, right? You need to know what your scanner is telling you about the severity, and then you need to create your own severity scoring where you know that, let's say, all the critical issues that are coming are only from the dev environment that never leads to production, fully locked in, and it's all about the deployment of isolated containers within the dev environment. Critical issues there don't seem as critical compared to the critical finding on the production um, facing web application where you can very easily, I don't know, like hijack the sessions, for instance. That would be a lot more critical than critical vulnerability of a library that you cannot possibly hijack just because it was just a false positive, or even if it wasn't, what kind of harm can you do? Not as much as you can do with the web app and stealing the sessions. So applying the context and kind of contextualizing the risk is extremely important. And it becomes a lot more cumbersome once we talk about the third party and all of the supply chain risks, right? Because now you have this thing where there's an established trust in one way or another over this vendor, because now you're saying, okay, based on what you told me about your security policy or your security posture, we are fine, let's say, doing business with you as one of the third-party vendors. And if then something goes down, something goes wrong, that trust is damaged, right? But there is already an established trust, and we need to figure out, is this trust warranted, or are there any things that we can do to kind of trust but verify, so to speak? So contextualizing the risk for the supply chain issues is a lot more complicated. And I'd say the best solution that I found so far is that the way that we look at the contextualizing our first party vulnerability, so to speak, um, should be applied in a similar fashion to the third parties. If we have a vendor that is supplying us with some sort of form of authentication or payment systems, right? Let's say our web app is using and is charging clients and they need to go through the payment, and we decide to use one of the payment vendors. Then this becomes a lot higher criticality or a lot higher importance versus another vendor that literally provides us maybe um, ability to change the locale in one of our development applications, right? That's not going to be as important, even though it's critical vulnerability, for instance, if it comes out, it's not as important, right? So again, we can still kind of figure out how to contextualize it. It just becomes a lot more complicated.
So thinking about DevOps and DevSecOps as concepts, as what if you want to call them philosophies for working with technology. We see a lot of the cross-pollination of responsibilities. So developers being given the keys to, say, AWS to spin up their own instances through infrastructure as code and those sorts of things.
Mhm.
So adding in the security element as well, and thinking about that as having the DevOps person being a subject matter expert both in dev and ops, across some form of that. Are we adding too much onto the plate of folks who are in these sorts of DevSecOps type environments? Or do you think the tooling kind of helps actually eliminate some of that?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think the tooling helps to eliminate lots of those issues. Like it's a matter of finding the right policy in place, right? Um, there's lots of tools that have recently been deployed out in the market that literally provide you like automated IT access grant that is very, very automated. Um, for instance, let's say I'm in an environment that uses Slack and I want to use the bot that gives me the access to specific um, EC2 rules so that I can create EC2 for myself only within the perimeter of my user within dev environment account, so to speak. Then I can leverage plethora of different vendors at the moment to say, please do it and give me the temporary access for X amount of days. Um, so definitely tooling like this could help tremendously because now what we're trying to do now is we're adopting the framework of like zero trust, giving the access just for what people need for a certain period of time, and we're giving it just in time. And we're doing it within the borders of zero trust, which is giving um, you whatever you need, nothing more. And we can do it in a safe and autonomous, automated way without many problems. And tooling definitely helps. But I think to your point about the DevOps and DevSecOps and what kind of responsibilities there are for those folks is really to try to figure out how to establish the right policies in place, how to establish what kind of things are necessary and what kind of things are should be explicitly disallowed or explicitly be alerted about within the company. If a person tries to potentially spin up more than one environment for the EC2 through, I don't know, just Terraform, and they were able to bypass some of the guardrails in place, then there's definitely some sort of alerting that needs um, to be fine-tuned and things like this. So the tools can do the purpose for what it's necessary, which is automate some of the processes that are very tedious and manual. Um, but the but the responsibility is still on the shoulders of DevSecOps folks to try to figure out what kind of policy, what kind of framework in place they want to use and how. And I would argue that this is something that is not too much, but just enough because in the end of the day, the DevOps people want to be able to say that we are the ones who are owning the cloud deployment and we are the ones who are able to ensure its quality. And what I mean by quality is, making sure we don't have absolute users, we rotate the keys and all that, and security of our cloud infrastructure is also part of that quality work.
That's a good answer. So, thinking in a slightly shifted gear here, talking about government regulations when it comes to supply chain. So, we're starting to see more and more industries who are being mandated by the United States government and other governments of the world to kind of show their work when it comes to the software that they're building in order to, provide SBOMs to the government to make sure that they're using secure libraries and everything along those lines, as well as what specific libraries are being used. And that's for devices as well as for health related software to have kind of uh, that that recipe, that list of what is going in for the supply chain for that device. So my question is, do you, I mean, I see that as kind of a net positive. It's kind of like pushing organizations to implement the correct tactics in order to tackle some of these supply chain issues in a way that, while government mandates may not be the best way to do this, it certainly is a way to actually get some action going. So we're going to
Yeah.
be hopefully net more secure over the entire country than we were before because of these mandates. So what are your thoughts on government mandated supply chain type things versus just sort of doing it for the good reasons, which is securing your stuff,
Yeah. Good question. Very good question. The way that I look at it is my concern is that if you dictate something over to a person, most likely this person is going to do it as part of a checklist and not wholeheartedly.
Fair
Uh,
point. Yeah.
and and what I mean is that like potentially if the government keeps mandating those kind of things and um, we'll end up in a situation where majority of the companies that don't prioritize security or frankly don't just have enough budget for this, which is also part of not prioritizing security, will just do it as a security as a checklist, so to speak. So it will be very inefficient SBOM and it's going to create um, wasted information, so to speak. Like nobody's going to be able to act on it. Nobody's going to be able to do something meaningful with it, but it's going to be there available for people to showcase to the government and to say, okay, we're doing what you folks asked us to do. That's my concern. Um, what I am looking at as the positive growth is that what I like about the US is that it's usually a place for innovation. Usually that's a place where people say things like, oh, this thing doesn't work for me. Let me go and invent something new. And there's a lot of competition there. So I think this competition for trying to figure out how to conquer this vulnerability, which I think is nobody's really chasing the end goal, but everybody's chasing the result. Um, sorry, not the result, the progress of it and the mini results on the way is what actually drives the innovation forward. And everybody else in the room will want to catch up. If one person is saying, let's go, and another person saying, okay, let's go, but go a different direction, go faster, ultimately in a few iterations, you're going to have everybody moving somewhere. Um, and you would hope that majority of the people would be moving in the right direction. So I think the best way that I can see it and I think the industry is going to be moving forward based on that, which is the healthy competition between different vendors, healthy competition between companies and innovators forward. And the government is doing something on their part that they can do at the minimum value, and it still provides a value. It's a way it's a kick in the butt, so to speak, to do something. And I think it's mostly targeted to folks that haven't been prioritizing security at all, and now they have to do something. But again, if those folks have not been prioritizing security, most likely they're going to do it as a checklist yet
The,
again.
that that is an interesting point. So talking about the incentives behind why you are securing your software. So traditionally as a company, you would like to prevent loss, to reduce risk across the board there. And now you also have this little government agency saying, hey, you also need to do this. It's not exactly going to have the same incentive as we could possibly lose money. So do you see kind of a hybrid, I kind of see kind of like a hybrid solution to that. So we do have the government mandates, but we also don't want to lose money. So
Yeah,
I kind of see it as like the internal teams need to kind of surface that and say, here's our risk. Yes, the government is mandating this, but we might as well do it right if we're going to start this program, those sorts of
yeah,
things. And obviously that can be kind of a tough sell. As an engineer, you may not have that kind of sway with the higher ups who are starting to mandate these sorts of things. But I think it would be worthwhile to take the time to, to educate the C levels or the board or whoever about those risks and say, hey, it's not just government regulations, but we're also, this is the right thing to do. So we might as well do it well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I would probably say that that's going to be in the shoulders of those senior ICs in the company, and being able to articulate this to the management and to the C board. Um, and fortunately, senior ICs are usually the ones who are looking in the industry. Senior ICs are usually the ones who are trying to do those kind of innovations and, going to the conferences and doing some sort of talks and research and whatnot. So um, I think as far as the equilibrium of what is happening and who's doing what, I think so far we're in a fairly healthy spot. As long as senior SEs are feeling incentivized to do their work well and feel welcome to give contributions to the seaboard, and again, that's the responsibility of the seaboard to ensure that that is happening, then we can all feel confident that the progress is going to happen in the right direction.
Right. So what are your thoughts on what types of problems do you feel the supply chain industry has currently that haven't been solved yet? And maybe what do you see down the road?
Yeah, so I think number one is like the problem of the authenticity of the vendor. Um, the way how a lot of times when you speak to the vendor and you sign up and do some sort of integration, um, you don't have too many action points to be done until you sign this contract and you have the installation. And I see a lot of times situations where, let's say I sign up for vendor X, and I know that I sign up for the vendor X, maybe somebody in my company made a post about it. And then it doesn't stop anybody from outside the world to see that, I sign up for vendor X, create a domain that looks very similar to this and say, by the way, we changed the payments, here's the pay account. Um, can you do this? And I would probably challenge that quite a few companies would probably just change the information there and just go along with the payment. And I don't think we do a lot of good authenticity checks throughout the whole time of using the vendor. That's kind of one. And two is, since I kind of touched on the security as a checklist, sometimes there is a compliance as a checklist. So whenever we do this exchange of the SOC 2 reports to ensure that we satisfy all the requirements, um, we don't really check into all the security things that were done within the company itself. And sometimes it's an implicit trust. Oh, you folks have SOC 2 Type 2. Awesome. Then we can go with it because that was one of our privacy requirements as one of our checklists. And I think that will become more and more prevalent, that we not doing our due diligence to check third-party vendors and what exactly is happening with them. And in case if something happens, in case the data breach happens, in case the company gets ransomed or whatnot, what do we do with our information to ensure it gets properly retrieved, secured, safe, or whatnot? Well, usually that happens because we didn't do the due diligence, or we haven't figured out all of the threat actors and whatnot that play along with it. So I think those two are kind of the main issues. And I think along the way, along the road, like few years, um, we'll see a lot more of just the vendor confusion, as far as, at least in the US, you have a very nice market of being able to start almost anything from scratch. And if I want to start a company that will do, I don't know, like log aggregation, I can start it. Yeah, I know that I'll be competing with, 20 plus big log aggregation companies, but I can still compete. I can still have some share of their business. And most likely, since I can figure out how to do log aggregation good enough, I can score some clients. But if I have malicious intent, I can do log aggregation and selling some of the data or do something else with this data um, while providing the services. So I like to use the comparison with like dependency confusion. I think there's a vendor confusion vulnerability, so to speak. I think
Oh,
that's going
that's
to come
interesting.
in
Yeah.
yeah, in 10 years because of the lack of the current processes, like, not enough due diligence, compliance as a checklist. We'll probably have vendor confusion vulnerability at some point.
So that's interesting. Thinking about exchanging checklists, as you said, with a new vendor relationship. Do you see just more checklists in the future as well, or do you think would we ever come to a point where we would be able to vet a vendor in a way like a background check for an employee type thing, or what do you think makes sense here?
Yeah, I would say that I have an opinion of I don't know and I don't know what to do to make it better.
Okay, fair
So,
enough.
um, because like even if we think about the employee background check, that's also the set of checklists, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't think that changing the checklist requirements is what's important. I think changing the processes on how we vet and what exactly we do with this information is important because we can gather a lot of data from the company and it's not going to help us a single thing. But once we know what to do in the context of our business and contextualize this data to what it means to us, that's when I think where it starts making sense. So I don't think there's a single checklist that will work for every company. Potentially, maybe in the future, we will have a general checklist with like 1,000 plus things to check. And based on your business, you can decide what to keep and what not to keep. And it will make a lot more um, custom and more efficient check for you as a business. Maybe that's the way, but again, I don't know what I don't know, and that part is confusing, very
But I
confusing.
think I think also your point about America being a place where a single person can kind of pop up a new solution and start selling that does further complicate these sorts of checklist discussions, because how do you verify one single person as a vendor for that
Yeah,
library versus, it'd be rather easy to look at a Fortune 500 company and there's tons of data about that company out there. You can kind of get an idea of how they work with others, who they're working with currently, that sort of thing. But it is a bit riskier for those smaller shops. And, by extension, using open source things also carries that risk with it because you don't know who's contributing. Unless you have a team reviewing those code changes, you don't know what changes are going into each update of those libraries, those sorts of
yeah,
things. So there's definitely, some trust issues to work out in the industry. Because that's a pretty general thing to say. We have trust issues.
yeah,
Um,
for sure. The thing that you made me think about actually now is that one thing that was kind of top of mind for me for this year in terms of the libraries itself and like third-party code is that um, I haven't seen a good solution yet that does notification or alerting if a specific GitHub repo, for instance, has been hijacked or the developer abandoned it. And the same goes for NPM registry, PyPy, and things like this. And it seems like the solution there is fairly simple one from implementation standpoint. And I'm curious if this year folks going to try to tackle this as a problem and see, because that is also one of the issues. Like, what happens if you sign up for the vendor that decided they're going to go bankrupt? It's the same way in the open source world, right? You have a developer that decided to abandon this repo. You know, if you're paying money for the vendor, and they go bankrupt, you know what to do. If you don't pay money for the open source vendor and they abandon it, you pretty much stuck on yourself. You either fork the repo and start maintaining it yourself, or you stuck with a ticking bomb. But I feel like a good vendor or a good solution could be done in place to be on the lookout for all the repos out there that exist in both registries, in GitHub, GitLab, all other areas.
It's definitely an interesting concept to have a notification attached to the change of trust. You have a trust with the original developer, and if any aspect of that gets changed, then you're going to want to know about it, for your product that you're building on top of that.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
thinking.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that does kind of tackle that problem where with open source libraries, like you said with npm, people have account takeovers, occasionally if they don't have two-factor auth, enabled. So how do you know when the email address on, the person who created your library changes?
Right,
So yeah, that's an interesting concept.
right. Like things like if the repo has the GitHub actions and GitHub actions get hijacked, or simply the git commit signing, like if it's enforced, then you know that all commits from the developer are going to be verified. But if they're not enforced, I can figure out how to take over and make it look like I'm this developer that is doing the commits, even though it's malicious code, right? So um, it seems like the world is moving into the direction of, I think we're going to trust people, or rather identities, less. I mean, why I said identities instead of people is because there are a bunch of services that are running that don't just, not people, but services. And we can say, in general, identities, how can we trust identities less? And how can we provide just minimum amount of trust for this identity to exist? It seems like that might be the thing of 2024.
All right, so we're nearing the end of our time here. I'd like to give you a chance to add any last thoughts you may have, anything you'd like to, throw in there to talk about in regards to the supply chain.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting year to see how things play out. And obviously, when it comes down to a tremendous amount of data that we have to deal with and tremendous opportunity to anybody in the world can start creating a library, submit it, and there's going to be very little amount of checks and balances in place. And with the tremendous amount of AI implementation, I think we have to deal with a lot more and more issues like this and a lot more vulnerabilities. And it's a matter of not trying to find the right solution, but trying to find the most efficient one. Because there are many right solutions how to tackle it. And it's a matter of trying to find the most efficient one because we have a tight deadline or constraint of too much data and not enough time. So I'm curious how this year is going to play out in terms of the supply chain issues and third-party code vulnerabilities and things like that.
All right. Well, thank you, Alexander, for coming on today. I think we had a great discussion. And that's it for us today. And I will see everyone later.
Thank you so much.